what made you decide to start that in the first place? I mean, like, why do you think you had that spark? Was it your parents? Was it just you were frustrated by something? You had an itch to what was it?
There are lots of small businesses that get started every year and lots of small businesses that die. And they die by no fault of their own, right? There's still a lot of things that need to go right. And no matter how, if you've got the best people in the world on a team, doesn't mean you're automatically successful, right? A lot of things need to happen.
How about building that team? Like, so you have to build up a team. So great, you have the core group of people to get started, and maybe it's your own network, things like that, people you really know. But then you have to start growing it, right? You now do get those first customers. You have to start delivery. You have to make sure you're actually getting it to market. You have to start hiring salespeople and marketing people and other folks that maybe weren't part of the core group. How do you recommend entrepreneurs go about that? And who are the ones that do it the best? And like, what are the foundational elements, like cultural or other things you need to put in place to make sure they can build a repeatable hiring, team building mindset that will let them scale?
I want to work with people who don't need my help at all, right? You asked what the best leaders are. The best leaders are coming in here, listen, I know exactly, like the serial killers, they come in and they know exactly what they need to do. They know what they don't know. They are fantastic leaders because they know they've already got the first 10 people that they want to hire, and it makes perfect sense for what they want to do. Their plan of action is clear, concise. They've delivered this mission. They know what it is, right? The clarity is mind-blowing.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. I'm super excited to have Steve Marcus, the founder and general partner of Riot Ventures, here with me today. I've known Steve in a few different ways for a long time. He has an incredible background in the companies that he's invested in, the companies, frankly, that he started, and I think has a really unique take on what it means to be an excellent entrepreneur and to build really, really successful businesses and identify those from just a certainly venture perspective, but also as being someone who's been inside a lot of those companies and built them as well. So Steve, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So as folks know, I really like to get started in understanding your own entrepreneurial journey. So maybe walk me back to when you kind of think through your first sort of entrepreneurial energies that got you started in life.
Yeah. Well, look, my entrepreneurial journey is a long one. I've been an entrepreneur, founder, CEO for 25 years. I'm dating myself now. My first company was in high school, selling and fixing computers, believe it or not. I rode my bike down to the town clerk to register a trade name, and actually got found out by the local newspaper. And, a reporter called me and said, "Hey, I want to write an article about you and starting this company." And I said, "Absolutely not. I rode my bike down to get this trade name. I can't take any more business. I don't even know how to get to them." But I was successful in that first company. Most people, kind of get started and sell to a few people. And I grew that business to the point where I was building, metro scale internet networks and data centers for customers before I went to college. So it was a successful company, small business, but still a successful company.
And I have to ask you just even for that, like for two things. One, it sounds like you could have been like Michael Dell and started Dell Computers because he sort of started the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I had one of the first Dell computers actually. And, at the time, people were just building computers and selling them to others, right? You would go down to a computer fair, you buy all the parts. Gamers do it now. But back then, there were a few kind of companies started like Compaq that were, trying to work on prepackaged PCs. But most people bought like this little mongrel of a computer, which is what I built for others and sold it to them.
Yeah.
It was great business.
And also then what made you decide to start that in the first place? I mean, like, why do you think you had that spark? Was it your parents? Was it just you were frustrated by something? You had an itch to, what was it?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in an entrepreneur family. My dad had been an entrepreneur, started his first company in 1969. And so I grew up in that, just it was second nature to start a company. My mother was a government administrator, so far from being an entrepreneur, took a conservative job, and maybe that's why that balance worked. I started the computer business because in high school, I just started fixing computers. Right, in the classroom, teachers would ask me, to work on the computer or help them with something, and then it came down to, can you help me buy a computer? And then just sort of, just graduated into why don't I source one for you? I'll sell it to you. And I knew how to put it together. And then it started fixing other people's computers. Somebody said to me, hey, I got a local business. I need help with, accounting and, some word processing software. Can you help me with all that stuff? So, that's what it started to be, a word of mouth business. I never did any advertising. And that's the best way to start a company, is your customers pull you into it.
Yeah, 100%. And then what made you decide to exit that and go on to all the next things? Like, how did you decide it was time?
Well, I did that in high school, and then I had this impression that college was going to be really hard. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to go to school. I actually just gave the business to some people that I had hired and gave my customers away and said, look, I'm going off to college. It's for you guys. And then when I got into college, I very quickly, started to do some consulting work for some others too. I went to a career fair. This was .com bubble times. And everybody was getting these crazy jobs. And I went to a career fair just to see what it was like as a freshman, and ended up with a consulting gig to build out the data centers for a e-commerce company in the US. So I built out the US data center because I knew how to do it.
So you're at the job fair talking to them about getting a job there, and they're like, can we just hire you to be a consultant for us and build something out?
Yeah, well, I came across this booth, and this guy had this IBM AS400, green screen mainframe up, and I said, "Hey, what do you guys do with AS400s?" And he goes, "Wait, you know what? Do you know what that is?" And I said, "Yeah, I used to maintain one. When I was building these big networks, a big municipality asked me to maintain this thing, and he said, "Give me your resume." I said, "I don't have a resume. I'm just here to check out. I'm a freshman." He said, "Well, look, give me your contact information. I'm going to give you a call." And so he called me, and he came in, and we had a conversation about what I had done. And he said, "Look, we need some help. Do you think you could do some things for us?" And I said, "Look, I just showed up here. I didn't know if I had the time to do it, but I'll do it on the side for you." And then that turned into, building a pretty big data center out for these guys.
That's insane. And so that was the next business then that you're doing that.
Yeah, well, I'd say the continuation of the consulting business. And then I wrote a business plan I had been doing some things on the side. So this is part and parcel of the story. So I wrote a business plan for a class in sophomore year to build cell towers. My dad had built one tower when I was younger, and cell towers, people were building out cellular networks, and I thought it was a good business. And so I said, hey, I'm going to write a business plan for this class. I flew out to the second annual Tower Summit and Trade Show in Vegas, put on my suit and actually learned how to build cell towers at scale, wrote the business plan. And my professor said, you know what, this is a really good idea. Why don't you start this company? I said, look, A, I'm a sophomore. B, I don't have any money. I've did this consulting gig, but it's not enough to build cell towers. And he's like, well, you should do some homework on it. And, lo and behold, I did find some financing to do it. So I did start that company as a sophomore. And then I realized I needed some more money. And I had been an FCC license squatter. That was one of my big claim to fame, is that it's an esoteric space. Again, I had learned it from being in the family business that there were FCC licenses to get. And so it's a lot like domain squatting, for $50 and some filing fees, you could get these licenses. And I ended up owning a good chunk of the wireless spectrum licenses in New England, basically between New York City and Boston. I squatted those, and then I sold them as a sophomore. I think it was a rising junior in college. I sold it for millions, and I was about 19 years old when I did that deal. And so I was able to use those proceeds to boot up the cell tower business. So it was a comical situation.
That's crazy. But what do you think that enabled you to even, so I get why you thought about doing the squatting on that. That makes sense. Some people might be asking, well, I can't go do this myself because maybe I'm not privileged enough and I can't afford that. What do you think enabled you to afford to go do that, or be willing to take the risk with whatever meager savings you had to say, I'm going to go spend it on this? Whereas I'm sure most of your peers in college were drinking beers, partying, and doing all that other stuff. And you're like, I'm going to go spend my extra money on FCC licenses.
Well, the FCC licenses, I actually accumulated some when I was a teenager in high school. I had learned, so some history there is that Nextel had become a cell phone carrier because they basically rolled up a bunch of two-way radio people. And my dad was in the two-way radio business. And so he showed me this article that, Morgan O'Brien, one of the founders, had basically come up with this kitschy plan of, I'm going to make a two-way radio and a cell phone in one. So he bought those licenses to become a cell phone carrier. And so there was some precedent that he had been buying licenses. And I saw an article and I said, geez, why don't we just find this pre-Google Maps? Why don't we just find the circles, where in between that you could get a license. And it really just took $50. Each license was $50.
Wow.
I sold them for, $330,000 each. So it was a pretty good ROI afterwards.
Insane
But
return.
it was an insane return. It was one of the most insane ROIs I've ever had. And I parked it for a while. I got those licenses. One of the founders came to meet with me and kind of lowballed me to buy licenses when I was in high school. And I said no. And then I moved on to college, and that's when I really needed the money. There were some valuable lessons, by the way. They told me, one of the founders told me, he said, look, anytime you want to sell something, you want to look like you don't need the money.
Yep.
And anytime you want to buy something, you want to look poor as hell.
Yep.
And, at the time he met with me, I was a high schooler. I didn't have any money. I was very poor. Even I was making money in the consulting business, but I was just a kid. And I took that advice to heart. And so when I went to go sell the licenses in college, I called up my DC FCC lawyer, who was on Pennsylvania Avenue right outside of the White House. And I said, look, I want you to call Nextel, and I want to have a meeting with them at your office. And so I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I bought an Armani suit with the last $2,500 that I had. And I rolled into the office and I pitched them, and I proceeded to ask them for tens of millions of dollars. When in reality, I would have taken a lot less.
Yeah.
I ended up doing the deal for a pretty good chunk of money. And, I ended up doing consulting for them afterwards. They were so impressed with me afterwards. They said, look, why don't you come do some M&A for us? And so for 5 years after that deal closed, I was working with those guys, trying to close more, buy and sell licenses, same thing.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. I mean, Nextel, I'm sure most people probably listening to this don't even know. It's such a great story in general. In what they built, their entrepreneurial journey. In of course, I actually worked at Sprint Nextel shortly after the merger in the Virginia office, which is more the Nextel crew, so not the Kansas City Overland Park Sprint crew. But yeah, such an amazing story. And going back to your though, like this is once again like so amazing because most essentially kids aren't making decisions like that. And like I'm even having the thought that I'm going to go buy. I need to look the part and play the part to get away with getting a big deal and make the investment on a really, really fancy, nice suit to go do that. Like what do you think made you different then? And I'm sure still probably today where you're making these decisions as a 19-year-old?
I read this book. I think when I was a young entrepreneur, I was always trying to play up, like I had imposter syndrome for a while, which was, I didn't believe that I was successful and I wanted to look the part, even though I was very young. As a consultant in high school, I always wore a shirt and tie to my customers. Fixing a computer, I brought a briefcase, I had a nice watch, and it's because I read a book, and I think it was called The Entrepreneur's Edge, and it was just to basically look the part. It was look the part. It was show up, have a nice watch, dress better, look like you're a professional, and people will take you seriously. So that pervaded my thoughts. In high school, whenever I was on the job, and in college when I was on the job, I always dressed up. These days I wear a hoodie and jeans all the time. That's my uniform. But back then I was young and I tried to look like I was older and more successful, and it stuck with me.
Do you think that is actually on this part of like sort of playing a part in some ways? In a way, like I think even wearing a t-shirt and hoodie today, right, is we're all sort of playing a part to some extent in what you look like, how you show up are some of those critical stories that we all tell. And it sounds like that's one of those key lessons that actually stuck with you. It's like, hey, like you got to know the part you're playing, when to play it, how to play it. And probably this, by the way, goes for some of the stuff we'll talk about, like, but even like, how does someone pitch? I mean, my advice to founders in many cases is know your role. When you go into a pitch with a VC, if you're the technical founder, don't try to be the sales guy. And if vice versa, let each person play a role. Whatever it is you have internally, I don't care. Play the role in front of the VC because they're looking for a story to be told.
It's exactly that. I can tell you that narrative matter, images matter. When it comes to even slide decks, the window dressing that you put on a slide deck, I can tell you stories of entrepreneurs who have put their story together with not much window dressing. It's just a plain old, engineering version deck with some bullet points, white background, nothing special, right? And showed it to some investors, and the investors like, I can't invest in this thing. Like, look at this. So my advice to that founder was to go get that deck prettied up. Just bring it to a designer and have it look better. Have it look like it's a world-class production. And very same investor got this deck back, same content, but with it looking world-class, and said, wow, this is an amazing company. Same content. Same content. It just goes to show you that people you don't appreciate it. I think there's a lot of engineers out there who think, why do I need to make this look good? Why do I need to dress up? Why do I need to show, look the part? It matters.
Yeah, no, it completely matters. It's one of these things, I think in some ways what you just said is sort of an indictment on that VC and on many people, where it's like they can't see past the window dressing to the gem underneath it all. But at the same time, that's kind of the way the world is. We are all somewhat lazy, and we want a story to be told to us. And so but it's amazing that you got that insight so early on.
It's also trust. I mean, look, if you were a soldier in an army and your general showed up looking like disheveled, ripped clothes, didn't have it together, couldn't put a sentence together, couldn't tell a story, I mean, your life's in their hands. Like, you're not going to feel comfortable about walking into battle behind that person. You want them to look like a general. You want them to hold themselves like a general. You want them to describe the story, give you a narrative about why you should be laying your life on the line. The same goes for being a CEO or a founder, is you have to show up and look like people should put their trust in you. And the same goes for VCs. We're laying millions of dollars on the line. And believe it or not, there's a lot of trust that has to happen. I mean, we don't know everything about these people, every little story that comprises their background. We want to make sure that they're, trustworthy people, and that they're going to deliver on the mission, that they're going to go kill themselves, to make it successful. And that's, you need them to look that part.
And do you think actually looking that part, I mean, this is something I think people have written before, that looking the part it actually helps you feel in act the part, right? If you put on it's sort of one of those things that happened certainly during COVID, where it's like, hey, look, yeah, I'm working from home now, but I need to get up and shower and do all my normal things. And I'm not wearing sweatpants down here. You can't see, but I'm not wearing sweatpants. Like I still get ready, even though I have no in real life meetings today. I still could go outside and meet someone immediately if I needed to. And once in putting yourself in that mental mode, part of it is sort of that armor you put on in how you dress.
I mean, there was a story. I mean, we're used to Zoom and remote work these days, but in the .com times when internet was pervasive, just starting to be pervasive, there were people who were telecommuting. That's what we called it. And I remember this story, this news piece that had happened with this guy who was head to toe tattoos, head to toe, and he worked out of his living room. And he got up in the morning, showered, put a suit on, just to walk to his living room. Never went into the office. And the reporter's like, well, why are you doing this? Like, it's just your living room. Like, you could just wear sweatpants. Yeah. And he's like, look, this helps me get into work mode, is that I feel like I'm at work, and everything, that my energy, my work ethic, everything changes dramatically when I put that uniform on. I put that suit on and it says, I'm here to work. Mm-hmm. And it does matter. It's a frame of mind.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so on that note, you were kind of talking about this already, but I would love to dig in a little bit further on like the best CEOs and founders that you've seen. And you use yourself certainly as an example of this too, but what are those mindsets or heuristics or things that you think the best ones really put in place? And maybe and where does it come from too, right? Maybe part of it is a bit of an imposter syndrome. Certainly lots of founders have that drive where like, I don't necessarily belong here. I know I do on a regular basis. I'm like, oh, I get to speak to Steve Marcus. Like that is badass to me. Like I'm honored and flattered. And like, I shouldn't be at this level to be able to talk to Steve. And a lot of people probably have that mindset, but also what are the other things you see from a lot of other folks that you get you excited as an investor, but lead to frankly the best outcomes? And maybe that's a good opportunity. You should probably go through some of the investments you made, right? Toast, I think it was Stripe, trying to,
that's our metal. Yeah, Shield AI. Yeah, I mean, the best, there's a variety of things that make, somebody an impressive, amazing CEO. There are people who are great founders who aren't great CEOs. There are people who are great CEOs for that 0 to 1. And there are some people who are great CEOs for 1 to 100. And they're not all necessarily the same person. It's incredible if you find that person who's a unicorn throughout. Talking about the Toast founders, they got a lot of negative, reaction to when they started that company. I mean, who needed a restaurant point of sale company? I mean, it was a very, very tough slog for them. I think there were 70 companies or something when they started that were doing restaurant point of sale. I mean, it was just like, why do we need another one of these?
Yeah.
the trio of those people were in the special projects group at Endeca, and they work for a guy named Steve Papa. And Steve Papa is legend. He's a 180 IQ, brilliant, savant. And Endeca was, if you originally was in we'll call them the cloud search business or the enterprise search business, and they sold it to Oracle for 1.1 billion. And Steve did well in it. And, he had a special projects group where these three guys who founded Toastworks. So they were brilliant people who got told no every time they went out to the professional capital markets to start this business. And they said, look, there's a real opportunity here to build a software company for restaurants, and it can be big. And they got snubbed at the seed round, and they got snubbed at the Series A. And you know who did both those things is Steve Papa. He was their seed and Series A investor. He owned 11% of the company when it went public, or right around there, 11, 12%. And these people, if you ask Steve, they stuck through it. They bucked the trend when everybody told them no, and they didn't need another one of these things. They did it. And especially when they got some first customers, I think traction wasn't enough. Companies like Desktop Metal. Desktop Metal, Rick Fulop is an ambitious, big visionary. I say that he does his pitches, sermons from the mount. He is like Moses. He just gets up there and he gives you this vision of being a tens of billions of dollars company easy, right? He just unpacks how to be a monster company down into some more pragmatic, practical steps about how you go about doing that. But every time you talk to Rick, it's big, right? It's just a big idea. And the challenge with somebody who's a visionary like that is trying to put things into practice, like do things that are on a quarterly basis, deliver on the mission. But being able to be a persuasive storyteller, there's nobody better than Rick Fulop. He is an amazing storyteller about everything he's done and does, for sure.
So is it a combination of, it sounds like it's what, obviously storytelling is one, it's a key one in being able to do that to yourself, to your team, to your investors, but then it's also the just willingness to sort of stick with it, like grit.
Yeah. Well, so look, I think the elements, if you unpack that, I think where you're going with this is something we've discussed in the past, is about, certainly you have to be a great storyteller. Number one, that you have to be able to pitch a story, tell a story that's compelling, because at the end of the day, these companies are powered by people and money, and people that invest that capital want a narrative. They want a story. So you have to be a great storyteller. You have to be a great leader, and leadership is often persuading people to accomplish some goal. And it's a challenging situation. It's a pattern. It's a habitual pattern of persuading a group of people to accomplish something great. That's leadership. Leadership can also be independent thinking. Independent thinking is bucking the status quo. Starting a company is not following the trend. That is I'm going to do something different than everybody else. Like the trodden path is to get a job. Mm-hmm. But if you're an independent thinker, if you're a black sheep, it's about pitching something different without alienating people, right? It's about pitching something different to get people along with your idea, and leadership is accomplishing that goal, right? It's also pursuit of goals, right? That is the most important thing. It's like you have to get the job done. You can't show up as an entrepreneur and not get stuff done. You can be a great visionary, but you'll just run circles around yourself, right? Mm-hmm. It's about a pattern of getting stuff done. You were an Eagle Scout or something along those lines. Like there's something in your background that tells me that you have gotten some things, you set your mind to it and you accomplish it. Yep. But I'm looking for the people that are the 0.1%, the people that are 3 standard deviations away from the norm, not 1 standard deviation, not 2, 3 standard deviations away from the norm. And when you meet these people, it's sort of like being an NBA scout running across LeBron James. You run across LeBron, you saw LeBron at 16. Hell, if you saw LeBron at 12, you probably knew that this was going to be an amazing person. Well, let's say at 16, you knew.
But how do you get it? So, I would agree with LeBron. Everyone knew, right? It seemed like that was like obvious. But also there's so many examples, speaking of sports analogies, where you have these NFL teams, just thinking about NFL stuff right now, where they draft the amazing Heisman winning quarterback who seems like the obvious pick. They trade up, they give up all this money for this person, and the person ends up being a complete dud. Right. And these are professionals who are paid a lot of money to figure out who the right people they should bring on board, and they get it wrong. And obviously the same thing with VCs, right? It's a power law for VCs too, right? You're getting it wrong far more often, frankly, than you're getting it right. So yes, when you know, but also you make a lot of wrong bets. Like, what are key anchor points you look for that you think, beyond the rare examples of like LeBron James, what other key things do you look for that you think make someone obviously different?
Well, you can stack the deck in your favor, right? At the end of the day, there are lots of small businesses that get started every year and lots of small businesses that die. And they die by no fault of their own, right? There's still a lot of things that need to go right. And no matter how, if you've got the best people in the world on a team, doesn't mean you're automatically successful, right? A lot of things need to happen. The data I look for, though, is I want the best odds possible. I want to give myself the best chance to win. And team risk is one where I don't want to take on team risk.
Mm-hmm.
So what I look for in a team is people that know each other, people that have worked together in the past or have been friends for a long period of time, that their bond has been tested already. This is not an experiment to put these 3 people or 4 people or 5 people in an office and hope that they produce something. I don't want that to be the experiment. We have data. There's empirical data to show that the size of the founding team is predictive of success, by the way. So being a solo entrepreneur, which I've been a lot, is very hard, right? It's a much harder activity to lead something to a successful outcome, which may be an acquisition or a scaled company or IPO or along those things. But the data clearly show the size of the founding team is important. So I look for team size and experience working together. Believe it or not, also team size matters, because if somebody doesn't work out, it's not an existential situation, right? If your team size of 1 and you happen to be the impediment to the scaling the business, that's an existential crisis.
That is, although I would say too, I mean, I've been in situations where, the team it's sort of a 2 co-founders or something, and you might have a CEO though who's not the right fit. And that can be its own existential crisis, even if it's a team size of 2 and it's not just a solo founder who's the impediment. So what number do you like, is like 3 your ideal founding team size?
I think 3. I mean, 3 is great. 2 is more likely to be the situation. I'll definitely back people who are solo entrepreneurs. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just harder. And in the beginning, with the founding team, as you say, I look for the data. So what are the predictors? I look for the data that at least gives me the best odds. And so in deep tech, which is what we focus on, we want somebody who's technical. So out of that founding team, you can have 2 or 3 people. One of them definitely needs to be technical. I mean, we're talking about wielding technology. You need to be an expert in it somehow, some way. So somebody needs to be technical. You can't all just be, economics majors and hope that you figure it out. I mean, you can be really smart, but at the end of the day, you need to be technical. So you definitely need that somewhere on the team. And, when it comes to the founding teams, we also do things here, which is unique, is that we will back people who are at the pre-seed level who come with an idea. And they say, hey, listen, I have the idea for this company. It's a thesis that I want to prove out, but I want to recruit, I want to build my team. I want you to help me build that nucleus out of 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And so we get to be part of that hiring, decision-making. That is the clearest thing for me, is I want to see when somebody shows up, if you come with a team of 5 and there's 2 founders, but there's 3 people you hired, who are the first 3 people you hired? Yeah. Why? Pressure test it. Tell me why you wanted those people. What questions did you ask them? What's in their background that attracted you? What are they going to help you get done? Why are you shaping the org this way? It's sort of like if you were building a car and you came to me and said, hey, look, I have a theory of a car, but here I chose the engine, I chose these wheels and tires, and you're like, okay, well, why? And if those things are wildly off kilter, well, and I can play the movie forward. I already know that you're making some bad hiring decisions, and that's a failure of leadership right away.
So is it almost a better sign when they come to you and say, hey, look, I have the humility to recognize I need to build a good team. I'm hopefully a good recruiter, right? I can tell a good story because that has to be a critical element, but I also need and want help to do this the right way. Is that almost a good signal?
It's a mixed bag, actually. Believe it or not, I want to work with people who don't need my help at all, right? You ask what the best leaders are. The best leaders are coming in here. Listen, I know exactly, like the serial killers. They come in and they know exactly what they need to do. They know what they don't know. They are fantastic leaders because they know they've already got the first 10 people that they want to hire, and it makes perfect sense for what they want to do. Their plan of action is clear, concise. They've delivered this mission. They know what it is, right? The clarity is mind-blowing. And they're kind of like, look, I just want you to appreciate how good I am and stay the F out of my way.
Yep.
Right. And I want you to be a cheerleader, and I want you to be strategic. I want to have like very sophisticated conversations with you, but not about the basics. It's not going to be like, why should I hire Jane or Joe? It's not going to be like that. Now, there are some people who don't have a lot of management talent, right? They show up and their leadership, meaning that they've worked in groups, they've mobilized people, they've accomplished things, they've done some difficult things in the backgrounds that are leadership. They have the potential, but they haven't managed a lot of people in the professional work setting. And it's okay. Like I'm happy to give them some inside baseball, but we sit down and we do this calibration session where it's like, let's go through their resumes and we'll see what I see, we'll see what you see. And it's a train the trainer, teach a man to fish kind of thing. And if they take that signal and run with it, that's an ideal setup for me, not debating each hire in that way.
Yeah, because that's almost like a rule general for any company to grow, right? You need to have someone who can understand, I want to learn how to do it, but I need to be able to replicate that on a regular basis. Otherwise, the company can't scale and grow at all. Do you think, how many of the founders you talk with, do they all come in with experience in that general market? Or sometimes are they just really smart and they've identified an idea, but then maybe they don't know it? They're not coming from that industry, right? I mean, you've started, we should actually talk about it again, like, X number of companies that you've ended up starting, were they all the same general thread around computers, maybe like wireless, things like that? Or were some of them in different areas and locations and just areas you're like, I've realized there's an opportunity here. I'm going to go jump into it. And I have enough. I did a bunch of research, like Elon Musk is maybe a good example of this, right? He's what, X, PayPal, all that other stuff. And he's like, I'm going to go build rockets and electric cars, which are not areas you would have said were in his background at all. And he's reading the Russian manual on rockets at a party, and it's crazy enough to go do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think he's got a degree in physics and economics, and but he's never built rockets, and he's certainly never built an electric car. I mean, Tesla's got an interesting origin story, but SpaceX, he truly got a group of rocket scientists together to build that company. I mean, I don't think he knew how to lead and mobilize and attract the best talent in the world to go build that company. I optimize for leadership. There are some things that, I've definitely taken people on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to management ability or specific skill set with regards to an industry. But generally, I like somebody who's coming in who at least can give me the voice of the customer or can talk about that part really, very intuitively, because I'm very customer focused. Every business you heard from even the beginning of time, the businesses I got into were I kind of pulled in by my customers. And I like that. Because that's what a business is, right? Otherwise, we're just sort of polishing technology for the sake of technology. It's about, commerce, about doing business. And so that's what I like to see. Most of my background has been in wireless for sure. I'm a first-time fund manager, right? It's the first time I've been in the venture capital business as an entrepreneur. So that's a brand new category for me. And I've learned a ton about how to be a great VC and how to build a venture capital firm and how to run one. But I had some experience as an angel investor, obviously I had a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. So some aspects of this I knew, but being a fund manager is a totally different, it's an orthogonal thing to what you think it is, right? It's a very different world than just being an entrepreneur and angel investor. Those are totally different things. I've backed, at Riot, we've got people who were high school dropouts, who were, just absolute polymath, brilliant people that are great leaders, but very young and want to build a company. We've backed seasoned SpaceX executives, that have Matt Sewell, who started Parallel Systems. He's building a railroad car. He's never built a railroad car. Maybe nobody's really built a railroad car in the last 100 years, right? I mean, that's not an innovative category, at least of late. Until Matt showed up. Matt led avionics at SpaceX. So he's a classic trained engineer, but his founding team had never built a railroad car, but that's what they're in. They're in the railroad car business, but he oozes leadership. I mean, you meet Matt, you're just like, I want to do whatever Matt does, right? Matt can be making anything. You just want to go into the fire with him. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, we've got a security AI company, and we've backed a gentleman who's been a chief security officer for 20 plus years at a handful of companies and said, hey, listen, we want to secure AI. It needs to be done, and I'm the guy to do it. I mean, tons of credentials and credibility in that space.
And so it's being a mixed bag. It sounds like there are different reasons for each investment in some ways, and different reasons why these entrepreneurs are great. Are there other elements? Okay, it's one thing, great. You'll go back from early on. What are key decisions you see the best ones making in the course of their first sort of second, third year? Where are the areas you tell them, hey, you need to focus on this, because if you don't, this will break and you will fail. Like, you might get to your Series A, but you're not getting to your B or C.
Usually it's about customers in the beginning. It's about, what are we in deep tech? We don't take on at Riot, we don't take on market risk. And the reason is that it's a very expensive risk to take on, right? That's whether the dogs will eat the dog food. You're building a railroad car. I mean, that is you have to know that there's a market on, you build that particular thing, that there's a market on the other side. You got to get that right. There are some other businesses that, we love taking on engineering risk. Engineering risk is, we know we can, use this technology, we can commercialize it, but it's not an experiment. It's not in a lab. It's not something where it's R&D risk, right? Where it's an unbounded financial function. We could do that. It might take 50 million. It might take 500 million. You have no idea whether or not we could do it. It's like, we could cure cancer. We don't know how much money that's going to take. But it's more like, we figured out how to do it at a small scale. Let's do it at a big scale. And so that's the kind of risk we like taking on. And we don't mind spending a lot of money, to do it. So, those are the most important things when somebody comes to me and says, hey, listen, I got an idea for something. It's about, like, what kind of risk is this?
Yep. And so it's about the risk. And if you can de-risk it and understand what that looks like, then what are the key elements you look for them to be able to build out, right? So it sounds like the risk is on execute. You said it's not market risk. So then presumably that means it's execution risk. And then there's a lot of ways you can mess up execution.
Lots of ways you can mess up execution. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's focus, focus, focus. It's continue to focus on the things that are important. Work on downstream capital markets, right? Financial risk. Everybody needs lots of capital as they grow, but it's building relationships down the line. It's communicating the narrative and vision and the milestones. Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And that's demonstrating that we are delivering on building a big category defining company. So it's constantly vigilant about focus. It's cash management, right? A lot of entrepreneurs, they get ahead of their skis. They start spending too much money. The burn is always in focus. And some of them are working on the right things, but they die within sight of the island because they run out of money. And so at Riot, the things that are most important is making sure we call it the red zone. The red zone is 6 months to fumes. And when you're in the red zone, your options dwindle dramatically, right? It's like, you have 6 months left. Do we sell the company? Can we raise more money? Can we engineer a soft landing? What's going to happen? Because 6 months is like time critical.
Yep.
But everybody gets in the red zone, and you want to be ahead of the red zone. So for us, it's making sure that they manage cash, making sure that they stay focused, and most importantly, make sure you got the right customer. I've had companies that optimize for revenue, and their customers are lousy customers. They don't pay their bills. They're not helping with proving the go-to market that there's a big market there. They're like these one-off customers that needed this particular thing, but nobody really has a shared problem there. You got to get good customers. That matters a lot.
How do you get good? I mean, that sounds like it sounds easier said than done, though, right? How do you get customers? There's so many startups who just want to get like one customer who's paying the money, and finding just that one who will do something, and then to say, well, actually, not just get one customer, you need to get a good customer. How do startups do that?
So to get a good customer, like what I qualify as a good customer is, one is obviously, I want them to pay their bill. So it's about one that pays. Second, it's about that it's a top 3 need for them. You look around and they say, look, this is burning a hole in my pocket. It's really important. I pander to greed. I want somebody to be able to make more money with a thing that they get from me. Mm-hmm. A lot of people focus on, they focus on revenue, quantity, variable, or fixed cost. And you can do all those things, right? That's valuable to a customer. There's been some McKinsey work done on pricing. And they said, look, for every 1% you affect price, 1% you affect quantity, variable cost, and fixed cost. How does it translate to the bottom line, to profit? A 1% increase in price is the biggest driver of profit. It's worth twice as much as everything else. So you can walk in and say, look, I help you with variable cost or fixed cost, which is good, but it doesn't really help the bottom line as much as revenue.
Yep.
Moral of the story is if I can sell the thing that I'm doing for more, I can sell more of it. That means more to businesses. So in general, I want to optimize for things to help people do more. So a good customer is making more money because of me.
Hmm. So in a sense, you're saying like incentives are critical, and thinking through those incentives of your buyer are a critical part of what a founder should be thinking about.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk about narrative, if you said like world domination in a certain category is my perspective about, who do you give it to first? Like that contributes to that story. And it's like, does this particular customer have that problem that everybody else has? Or is it specific to that customer? And so you don't want to end up in this niche-y thing that only a few customers can have. And you look, for a brief time, I was on the admissions committee at MIT. And part of that process, I started a company. I started a company to help run recruitment for elite universities. And when I figured out, at first it's a big category, right? It's 20 billion a year spent on recruiting in higher education. It's a very lucrative space. But are MIT's problems the same as, Rutgers? No, they're not. And they're very different kinds of applicants and very different kinds of pools and very different kinds of tooling that you need for those things. So just because you sold it to MIT doesn't mean that Rutgers has the same problem. So and MIT willing to pay a lot doesn't mean that Rutgers is willing to pay a lot. No offense to anybody who's Rutgers on this.
No. Of course, both great schools, obviously. We should talk more about the admission stuff at MIT because there's some pretty interesting stuff there. But before we get there, going back to, the idea of like the type of buyer or that incentive. I think isn't YC relatively famous for saying like build for, and maybe not just YC, but one of the people from YC, like build for one person. If there's one person out there who's willing to like utterly love and adopt your product, you have something. And then you can build and grow from there. So isn't the advice on the other hand say, you're sort of saying, make sure all the buyers have some general thing they share versus, hey, like go delight one customer. And if there's one customer in the world, there's probably two, and then maybe three or four. And then maybe you have to change and tweak your product a little bit. So your example, maybe you build it just for MIT because you have the relationships there. And then over time you evolve your product so it can work with Rutgers. Is that not the right mindset?
I would take the YC interpretation of focus on one customer as focus versus just one customer. Obviously, if you make one customer insanely successful, it means a lot, right? You want referrals. You want somebody to say, hey, listen, XYZ company changed our business fundamentally. We were able to do more. We were able to sell more. It was a massive change. But the likelihood, if you don't look downstream and look at the field and say, why am I with this first customer? I'll liken it to, let's say you had the cure for cancer, right? You have it. It's in your possession. How do you get it to everybody on the planet? Do you drive to the middle of Montana and hand it to somebody who's got cancer in the middle of Montana first? Or do you try to go to the dentist locations first? You go to places who need it most. And you can do that work a priori. You can go look at where are everybody who have cancer and how do I produce it? How do I produce it efficiently near them? How do I get it to them? How do I handle all the logistics, right? Imagine your solution is the cure for cancer and how you think about distribution, about who you go to first and how you get it in their hand, because you can't give it to everybody.
Yep.
Right? That's a fool's errand. The same goes for if you're building any kind of company and you want to solve customer problems, you got to think more intuitively about where are they? What are their characteristics? Is it going to take me forever to locate them, right? Like, do I have to go through all these hoops in order to get it in their hands? But look, I got the cure for cancer. It's going to change these people's lives and they're going to live, right? It's the same thing. A lot of people don't even realize that they have the cure yet, but you have to imagine it that way. And that's why picking your customers is important.
And is there an exercise that you try to run through with your founders around picking your customers, or even for yourself? For that company you built for MIT, did you pre-pick your customer that way? Or is like, hey, like I'm going to do research in this, build this company. And then after the fact, did you realize maybe it's not quite as successful as you want because the customers they seem like they're all the same, but in fact, they're so different?
Yeah, actually, I made the mistake in the beginning of customer-led product development, which was I found a first customer who was, and I was a representative of the customer, right? I was on the admissions committee. I was the one using the tool. And I built it for MIT and I said, look, no one else has this problem. It's sort of a unique custom piece of software for you guys. And then my phone started to ring because that person was bringing that software to other places, and my phone started to ring from other peer institutions. The problem with that, again, is it's still a small pool, and I've tried to look, maybe with rose-colored glasses about who's really got this problem, and I started to bolt on bigger and bigger pieces of software in order to make it applicable to everybody and his mother. So, sometimes that's okay. We start off with a niche piece of software. I love there are riches and niches. Find something small. If you look across all universities, there's a lot of software to build. What I did not appreciate in the beginning of being in the software business for EdTech was universities, if you're selling software, if you're selling enterprise software, universities were like the lowest rung of places you wanted to sell software, right? They didn't pay a lot. They were lousy customers.
Yeah.
They were lousy customers. And I found that out later on than I should have. But, we all make the same mistakes, and hopefully you learn from them and you change it. So I tell those stories to entrepreneurs. You ask if I do exercise with them. Of course, we sit down all the time and continue to ask ourselves, what's the destination? Where do we want to be when we grow up? What does this company look like at scale? Who are our customers? What are their characteristics? And if it's like, well, we want it for everybody, that's not realistic. You're not going to have it for everybody. Even Toast today is the number one in the restaurant space, doesn't have every restaurant. Yeah. It's just not realistic.
Yep. And what then, do you look through that stuff when you're going through, so that's an exercise you're running. Do you do that exercise before you even invest in many cases and try to sort of do that some level of diligence? Like, okay, I hear the pitch, the entrepreneur's given me some idea of what to do. Let's run this exercise. Let's call some train operators and see if they would buy a new train car.
Absolutely. We do the homework on everything. We're extremely customer focused, right? At the seed stage or pre-seed, you've got a couple of data points. One's on the team, right? And a preponderance of the work we do is on the team. Are these the people that are going to lead us to the promised land? And there's an idea maze that they lead us through. I think Mark Andreessen talks about it, is that, they've done the homework. They've done the work, hopefully, on the space, and they understand their customers and they understand the technology. And so we're pressure testing. We're doing confirmatory work on that front. But we're also doing a huge amount of customer work. We ask the customers, try to sift through the noise there and say, look, is this really a top 3 need? Is this a major thrust of yours? Could we see this being a big business as a result? And you know what? You still might end up with a false positive. You might look at that and say, yes, this could be. But you try to gather as much data as possible on the customer front. Those are the things we look at the most.
And then, okay, so customer front, team. What about going back to the team part though, an execution element? How about building that team? So you have to build up a team. So great, you have the core group of people to get started, and maybe it's your own network, things like that, people you really know. But then you have to start growing it, right? You now do get those first customers. You have to start delivery. You have to make sure you're actually getting it to market. You have to start hiring salespeople and marketing people and other folks that maybe weren't part of the core group. How do you recommend entrepreneurs go about that? And who are the ones that do it the best? And what are the foundational elements, like cultural or other things you need to put in place to make sure they can build a repeatable hiring, team building mindset that will let them scale?
High performing people attract high performing people. So essentially, and culture is driven from the core, right? At the end of the day, you can't control culture, right? You can't be prescriptive about it and say, here are the things that you will do and the culture here. You can put down values, you can construct the mission and the vision, and you can support the culture. But those key hires in the beginning will drive your culture, right? The nucleus of the management team and of the hires, what you elevate, what you value. If you have a sales culture and you put all sorts of artifacts and things around that champion, that espouse the values of selling, right? Like ringing bells and putting stuff up in front of an audience to show what, individual contribution or team contribution, right? What you value is what would be part of your culture. And I think org design is one of the most creative things you can do. And it is a mix of an art and a science. I focus as an investor and a board member on the key executives, right? I'm not, they need to have a great middle management team, and they need to have great individual contribution from people that are on the front line. I'm a big believer of the Amazon bar raiser thing. Everybody that comes in has to be better than the people that preceded you, right? You have to be raising the bar at the whole org, that you could pull somebody off in the mailroom and they would blow you away.
Yeah.
And so I think it's about recruiting the best of the best and continuing to deliver on that. Getting high performing people to function well together is very hard. It's like, McKinsey has this constant dilemma of you hire world-class people and you're trying to get them to play nice together. It's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard, but you need to have a great management team that's focused on only hiring the best and making them highly efficient.
And how are there things that you recommend people do to do that the right way? And said differently, what are the key elements that folks should focus on to create that? Because it's one, difficult to hire. I mean, one is, I guess we should go back further. How do you identify as a manager like CEO of a company? Maybe you've never run a company before. How do you identify those bar raisers? I mean, you can have a really high bar yourself, but how do you identify it? Number one, how quickly then how long do you wait to find that? Because there are so many founders out there who have such a high bar that it takes 6 to 12 months to make a hire. Is that correct? Or do you say, you know what, like maybe I'm going to go with the person who I'm unsure about a little bit. They seem great because I'm going to compromise a little bit, but compromise, of course, means to compromise. And is that worthwhile? But if you're burning cash, you need to get to your next raise and hit a few milestones. Is that a good trade-off? Like how does a founder think through that? Like what are the best heuristics around hiring and how to hire those bar raisers without killing yourself or dying before you get them?
The classic blunders are to put a butt in a chair just for the sake of putting somebody in a chair, right? Like I can't find somebody great, so I'm going to take this mediocre B team, B or C player, and put them in a chair, and something's better than nothing. That's a classic blunder. The other is waiting too long to hire somebody that you need in order to do the function. So it's a factory, right? It's a people. The inputs to a great company right now are people, and they make the whole machinery work. And if we were building a factory for any kind of a widget factory, and you saw demand coming, right? You have to put your crystal ball out and try to forecast for some demand. You would ramp up your factory. You buy the raw materials. You buy the machinery that you needed somebody to operate. You would think in advance of those things. Not crazy, but you would try to think in advance of those things. You have to treat your people in the same way. You have to look through the org, and if you don't have KPIs or you don't have anything, you're not measuring anything, you will never know whether you need to add capacity. Mm-hmm. So first things first, measure something. Yeah. Measure the team performance, measure output. What gets measured gets done, frankly, straight up. So that's number one. Number two is somebody goes and says, well, maybe has unreasonable expectations of their growth in some area, and they start hiring people, the wrong people or too senior people right away. Famous one is, a head of sales or a VP of sales or a EVP of sales or a chief revenue officer, right? The 6 people in the company are hiring a chief revenue officer. And you're like, okay, let's take a minute here and have a conversation about what a CRO, first of all, what CRO has taken that job? All the wrong ones, number one. But anyway, so it's about, looking at the appropriate hire for the appropriate time. And I'm always dialing back expectations of entrepreneurs that they think they're going to sell 10 times the amount of stuff that they're going to sell, and they need to ramp up everything in the org because of it. The reality is somewhere a lot less than that. So it's toning back expectations. Some entrepreneurs look to hire for weaknesses. Like, I'm not a good operator, so I need a COO. And so that's a red flag to me. Somebody comes up right away and says 6 people in the business and they're hiring a COO. You're like, okay, let's have a conversation about why we need a COO right now. Yep. And let's obviously help you with your weaknesses. But that's too much firepower for where we are.
I totally
agree. It's an appropriate person for the appropriate time and budget, right? Like CFOs for the right amount of spend or the right amount of financial infrastructure that you have, or a BP of finance, right? It's really just sizing the appropriate person for the phase of the company, and then what's coming. A lot of times it's about, do I take somebody? The debate I have is, do I hire somebody who's had 20 years experience doing this thing? And you're like, maybe, but probably not for a startup. It's probably a Series C conversation or a D or something along those lines. We're not looking for that 20 years experience in a CFO role right now. But it's those kinds of spirited debates about scaling the executives. And then again, looking at the metrics and saying what's working here and what's not.
Yep.
And as a board member, turning the mirror on them and saying like, hey, you showed me this metric. Is this working? Does this tell you that this is functioning properly? And if not, let's go look under the hood and pull the pieces out. More than likely, we found some dysfunctional person or dysfunctional process created by a dysfunctional person, that kind of thing.
And do you then recommend, or at least early on, companies, do they hire more for potential? So in other words, like, are you saying, hey, look, hire someone who maybe doesn't have that big fancy title and a ton of experience, but they have a huge amount of potential and there's just clearly upside in their abilities, and you kind of put them in a role and they will figure it out? Is that a better hire?
Every organization needs a mix of both, right? You need to show people, you need to take on some people who are high potential who have not yet converted that. And leadership is about mentorship and development of people. And you have to take on some people that have not realized that potential yet. So that they need to fit within an org. You also need people who are seasoned executives who have done it before because they've seen it, and their mistakes are going to cost you less. You're not going to get as creative outside of the box. Like, let me reimagine how we sell stuff. Like, let's reinvent the sales process. I mean, reality is we don't need to reinvent that many processes. There are things that can be brought from other places, at least some ideas on how to run a process. So you need a blend because you want to champion the idea that experience does matter, right? If you were going out, and maybe I'll use the race car example, you were going to go out, build a Formula One team. Would you want everybody, that costs tens of millions of dollars, if not in the hundreds of millions of dollars? Would you want would you want an entire team who's never built or run an F1 team before? But they have tons of potential, right? They've messed around with some cars in their garage and maybe done some little buggy races somewhere. No way. You would never do that.
Yeah.
The same goes for here, is you can't have all people on the come with the potential and all people who are just experienced, because then you won't win races either, right? You can't have everybody up who's only ever done F1 races before, because you could have the same problem.
Is there, related to that then, going back to your point about sort of everyone you hire should be a bar raiser, is there a point in the company's history where we say, like, we want everyone who's obviously has a great attitude, comes in with the right mindset, but we don't want everyone who's pushing for a promotion tomorrow because they think they are so much better than everyone else. And some people who just come in and like, they do a great job at their job and they are okay with that? Or should everyone still be pushing every single day because they are so ambitious and hard charging that they are pushing the boundaries on a regular basis?
Again, it's about the analogy here is that if you have it, again, the cure for cancer, and you're trying to get it to everybody on the planet, do you want the best people in the world that are going to help you distribute that to everybody in need on planet Earth? Or do you want B's and C's? Do you need somebody who's just going to run the plant in the back and kind of get the job done? When you think about it like that, when it's got to be a high growth and it's mission critical to get to be a scale, that's how you have to think about your business. Is everybody needs what I have, and I have it's hard. And even if I had it already, it still would be hard to scale it, to get it in everybody's hands. And I need the best people who are willing to spend an inordinate amount of time, who have an insane work ethic, who are smart and innovative, because the scale is breathtaking. And we're going to have to come up with some new ideas and new ways to go do this, because no matter what I'm bringing to bear, no one's done it exactly the same way. And there has to be some creativity that goes on here. And by the way, I need a legion of people. I need thousands of people at scale. I mean, Toast 7,000 people work there. I need thousands and thousands and thousands of people in order to do it. And we all need to be high functioning. If somebody is an impediment in that group for me to deliver on my job, well, that's going to demotivate everybody. And now I got 7,000 people who are not excited to do the job. So the answer is, in this particular thing, this startup world, this high growth tech company world that we live in, you must hire the best. It is an absolute imperative. There are plenty of small businesses. There's 1 million new small businesses that get started every year. You can take any kind of person you want into those things, no problem. You want to run a lifestyle business? Great. But you want to run a venture-backed company? We only build major league teams. That's it. That's it. We're championship teams because it's a slugging percentage. It's a Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. 20% of all your companies drive 80% of your returns. You have to be a highly successful company. So it's just, we're not built for that. We're not built for anything other than that.
Are there heuristics that you recommend, or how do you tell your founders to do, or things that you've done also in your own companies to do hiring well? Like how do I identify those top performers who are going to just utterly crush it? Because I hear what you're saying, but as someone who's also, I've hired a lot of people, it's really tough to identify that heavy hitter who's going to hit home runs all the time, especially if they haven't done it in the past before. And the problem is, if they've done it in the past before, they might not be motivated quite the same way to do it again in the future. So how do you identify that high potential home run hitter superstar, next LeBron James in a sense, who wants to be a part of the team, will join it and jump in for this hard, challenging thing called a startup? What are the rules or heuristics you tell your founders to use, or that you've used?
The hardest part is the first group, right? It's the first group of people that come into the company, because you're trying to convince them, right, to take on high potential people everywhere. They got a job already, like high potential, people that have a proven track record of excellence, are three standard deviations away, have massive impact on their organizations, right? These people are critical. And if they are leaving, it's because they believe in the opportunity. They believe in the mission of what you're doing, right? Number one is mission. Like, they can do anything they want and they know it.
Yep.
And number two is they know that they can make money anywhere they want. And it's not about money anymore. It's about, what do I want to do with my life that has impact, that satiates my intellectual, desires. It satiates whatever, something in their realm that they now realize that they want. Number three, it could be that the place that they're in is really just not doing it for them, right? That they're clearly having the conversation with you. It's about something's not going the way that they are. And high potential people need to be satiated. And they might go through companies like toilet paper because they come in, they conquer the world, and they're like, this is too small a pond for me. Let me work my way out. But that first group of people, you have to persuade, have to be amazing. And then once the snowball starts to roll downhill, that's what happens, right? They start, people walk in the door and they're like, Elon Musk, like, this guy is a baller. Like, and as a result, it's easier to hire the nth person into an org that already has that strong nucleus.
Yep.
But attrition is normal. It absolutely happens. There's no such thing as an org full of amazing people that don't have people who depart. And I'm happy for people to depart an organization, like if they of their own volition, or if clearly they're not performing to where they are. You constantly are culling the herd, right? But you have to be a transparent, clear manager about, here's what is expected of you, and if you don't do it, you're firing yourself.
Yep.
Or here's what's expected of you. We can't possibly contain your abilities. Like, we don't have a way for us to satiate you. You are too talented. You need to find something else. And so those people move on. It's totally normal.
Are there heuristics? I mean, going back to one of the things you said earlier was about setting up metrics that you measure to help make sure these people are achieving up to the expectations that you have. Are there any key metrics you think companies should put in place, look for, or does it just vary so wildly by company that it's sort of hard to say a generic answer? But are there certain things for engineering and product design, sales, are there things you think about, like, hey, this is what you should be measuring to know your team is actually achieving at the high level that you should expect?
The metrics differ between businesses for sure about what's important, right? You're building a railroad car versus building an airplane or a spacecraft, or, they're all, expensive, ambitious things, but what is actually measured can change, can vary widely. It could also be what you value, right? Some things can be measured that might seem innocuous, like to you and me, but that might be imperative. That entrepreneur or that CEO might view that metric as key to the castle, right? There's something that we have in this metric that's very important, like aircraft, about uptime and mean time between incidents, or anything along those lines, or lots of things that you need to measure in order to feel like you're successful. And they vary widely, but it's a conversation we sit down. And what I want is, I want a group of tight metrics, right? At the end of the day, you could have 6 pages of metrics, line by line by line, and you're measuring everything. And then all of a sudden you're not measuring anything because you're measuring everything, and no one has any, it's not, there's very few explanatory variables in the world. Like we learned this at MIT, is that you distill the world down to, when you're in the quantitative modeling, you realize that there's only a few things that really matter in a model. There's only a few explanatory variables that drive everything else. And so if you got this huge set of metrics, your team is all confused. They're like, well, I don't know, I got these 83 things I got to check off and I don't really know what they mean. I'd rather have some clear, concise things that we measure that make everybody and make the business tick.
Yep. And so, okay, so your suggestions, like, boil it down into specific things that make the team tick, be focused on those, and you help your entrepreneurs figure out what those are. How much time then, I mean, staying on the recruiting front for a second, how much time do you suggest a founder spends recruiting? I mean, let's say they're growing to some extent, right? So they're growing, they need to hire new people on a semi-regular basis. Is that, do they hire a recruiter? Are they out there trolling LinkedIn to find that next amazing person? What are things you think they should be doing?
A CEO, a great CEO, is spending 50% of their time on recruiting. And I think that's probably a conservative estimate. 50% and 40% on financing, right? Just about thinking about how they're managing their cash, how they are constantly trying to work with the capital markets and educate them on what's going on, because you're in charge of resources. And startups and tech companies need two things, essentially. They need people and they need money, right? There are some product focused CEOs, people who are also the product manager and the visionary, and they put that hat on, the player coaches, if you will. Now, those people might reduce some of that time to spend on product, but you have to ask yourself, should you be running product, or are you just there to provide some insight, like Steve Jobs? Everybody fancies themselves Steve Jobs, like, well, I know better than the customer, and I'm going to spend all my time on the product. And you're like, okay, sure. Steve Jobs is a one of one, but I'm sure you should definitely contribute to product, but in a strategic way, not in a tactical way. And so I still think 80 to 90% of your time should be focused on people and financing. And if it's not recruiting per se, you can break some of that 50% down to some recruiting. You should be focused on org design and processes and efficiencies about how you're getting all these people to work nicely together and measuring that. And measuring output, and then working with getting rid of people that aren't effective and bringing in the most talented.
Yeah. So it's, in a sense, it's not recruiting per se. It's essentially team management, culture, building out these things that create the foundation for kind of long-term success and growth and sustained growth.
Yeah. It's the same. By the way, it's the same thing we do in venture capital, right? To build this venture capital firm, started it 6 years ago with a small $10 million fund. And we're racing past $1 billion now, 6 years later, in assets under management. And what that happens, just like in any startup, is that once you reach product market fit and things start to snowball, capital is a commodity. You can get it anywhere. But we've built in the portfolio a group of people that are beacons. They're people who are amazing leaders, amazing CEOs, who have big visions about how they're going to be category defining companies. That attracts other people. So what even works in the venture capital model is that if you build, you are who you invest in. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for that team in the portfolio. They have shared attributes, and to some degree, they emulate our culture, right? They because our culture is important to us as in a venture capital firm, but those we invest in, we want to have some similar principles and values. It just works that way.
How long does it take in this case for Riot or for the companies you invested in or other ones you've started? How long does it take for that stuff to really start to snowball? Like, what's the time frame? I think, and I say this to some extent, where a lot of founders and entrepreneurs sort of think, oh, it happens overnight, right? You see this, like, you see Facebook or a Google, and it's like, oh, they were an overnight success. And of course, actually, very few of them really were an overnight success. It's actually years and years and years of being in the weeds before you get there. But what do you see? I mean, for you guys, 10 million fund and now almost $1 billion 6 years later. But I'm sure maybe those first few years were not quite that easy. And then it just started taking off.
The startup, the similarity, I mean, this is a startup, right? Riot is a startup. It's a Series B startup now, or Series A, plus, whatever you want to call it. It's still in early stages. And it astoundingly similar to a startup. I was fortunate to be the seed investor in Okta, and Okta is a household name. You go to San Francisco, everybody knows Okta. It's a great success story. When I invested in the company in 2009, no one knew it. And even when it went public in 2017, no one knew it. Like, people didn't know. They were like, Okta, or like, people didn't know what it was. And it took them between 2009 and 2017, it was 8 years. That's relatively fast to be a public company, but still not a household name. It takes a long time to be an overnight success. And I can tell you that every company, whether it's Stripe, Toast, Okta, Desktop Metal, you name it, those companies have all had existential moments where they almost died, right? That something had to go their way. There was a 50-50 ball that had to go their way in order to make it. And maybe for some of them, it was multiple times. So it's not easy to just like wake up and be a success story. People have a revisionist history. They're like, oh, well, they're always that way. I mean, I can tell you about other venture capital firms where the same story existed. They had one or two companies that put them on the map. And then again, it starts to snowball. It takes years and years to build a brand. I don't care where you are in any business. To have ultimate brand equity, to be a Nike of a space, takes a long time of development. And it takes a steady string of hits in order to be very valuable. And so the same goes for venture capital, is that we're in the early innings. I think we have one of the best brands in deep tech, but we're early in it. And the story is not yet fully written, but it's 6 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah. And is that something also you have to remind yourself in your team? And look, it's one thing for you to say, look, I'm in it to win it. I'm going to be here no matter what. I'm going forward, but like, you own the lion's share of things. You get the lion's share of the returns. Same thing with founders and CEOs. They're sort of in it no matter what. But then you have team members who it's a different transaction for them, right? Their risk reward profile is different. The upside looks different to them. For them to say, man, I'm going to be on this 10-year journey is a bigger question. How do the best ones go through those areas, through those existential crises, keep their team motivated and keep people moving forward to get to that next place?
I mean, every company, including venture capital firms, change their texture over the years, right? Andreessen Horowitz, when it was started by Mark and Ben with some folding tables and, some office in Menlo Park, I mean, it looks very different today than it did then. And, different kinds of people show up at certain, levels of the company and look for different things. We're in the most creative phase of venture capital firm building. And a lot of companies are in the most creative phases, with the Series C, A, B, and even honestly, Series D, E, F companies can still be very creative companies with a lot of exciting stuff that they're working on. It's just different. And so to stay motivated, you have to make sure that you have the right people in the right job doing the right things. And if it's standing up a new business unit or it's working on some new products, keeping them invigorated, you could do that for a long time. In a 10-year journey on a company, there's so much to create. I mean, as we talked before, if you start off with a nucleus of 3 people on the founding stage, but you end up at Toast with 7,000 people, there's been a lot of creation that's gone on there, a lot of stuff. You hear them talk. They had to figure out a lot of stuff. So it's really great. Now, from 7,000 to 15,000 people, is that as creative? No, it starts to work its way down on the curve. But a lot of people love that phase and they want to rinse and repeat. They want to do it over and over again. Mm-hmm. And it's constantly bringing people in who invigorate your creativity, who come in and say, I want to work on new and exciting. I want to come out with new products. I want to do things differently, and constantly putting that new blood into the org. But if you're hiring B and C's, or you're hiring people who don't really want, they just want to get the job done, an 8 to 5 job, and want to come in and punch the clock, then you're probably not going to have motivated people.
Yeah, no, it's a small pet peeve of mine. I don't know if this is a generational thing, but I find a lot of people that we talk to who tend to be a little bit younger don't seem to have that same sort of drive to say, man, I would just jump in. I mean, I actually sent a note to my team over the holidays and said, look, I'm obviously biased, but at the same time, like, man, I would have given anything early in my career to work at a company like Levy, my own company. I'm biased about it, but like, we grew a ton last year in one of the worst VC environments. We're profitable, all these other things. Like, that is so rare. I would have come in and worked almost for free for a company like that, to be able to learn and be a part of it. And I'll just raise my hand to say yes to anything that someone wants me to do so I could learn. I don't know if maybe it's our hiring or maybe it's just a mindset thing, but it seems there are fewer people like that out there who are really willing to jump in all the time and say like, yeah, like, dude, sign me up for whatever. Like, I just want to learn and get it done. It's I don't know if it's a generational thing or it's just the normal. I'm getting older and I complain about the earlier next generation.
Probably a mix of both. I mean, I hear some, the certainly the work ethic has changed. What's important, what's valued, right? The work-life balance. And it used to be about putting time in the clock and, you put 15-hour days in or whatever you needed to do, right? It's just the way it went. Me as an entrepreneur, I've always been my own boss. So for me I work 24/7. Whenever I can chip away at something, I do it. And that's the ethos of the firm. It's like, we're not an 8 to 5 shop. We're a 24/7, 365 shop. And I'm there for entrepreneurs. Like, my response rate to entrepreneurs is high because that's what they want, that interface, right? They want to be able to call somebody, SVB blows up and you'll suddenly have a $250 million hole in your cash pocket. And now you're saying like, look, I need help.
Yep.
You want to talk to your investors. You want to talk to your VCs. You want to talk to your board. And being responsive, you're only good as your last delivery in this business. So I think it's a hustle business. You have to work hard. My customers and suppliers, everybody that I'm in this business with, I want to be super attentive to, and I want to make sure that they are left with a positive experience, even in the situations where it's not a good experience, like the company goes down the tubes or whatever happens, they have a stroke of bad luck, or things are going great but not perfect. Whatever it is, you have to be there in the trenches and go through that. And I want to leave them with a positive experience, that they learned something out of it, that they were appreciative of the support even in the dark times. And that's hard to do. I think that's forgotten in venture capital. I think venture capital has become this like kind of country club business where it's fire a check in. If it works, call me. If it works, don't call me if it doesn't. And the reality is that I believe in an active venture capital, one where you put the wrench time in, you're there to support your entrepreneurs. We built the platform to be capital all the way through growth. That means entire life, you can have one trusted person that you can come to and say, look, I need $100 million. And we have it for you. Because the hardest thing for entrepreneurs is, believe it or not, it's lonely at the top. It's lonely to be the CEO of a company.
Yeah.
Can you really have conversations with your board? Can you really have conversations with your number 2, 3, 4, 5? You can't. You need to have people in the circle of trust who are there, a shoulder to cry on, or have some serious, sophisticated conversation. Like, I need help. I need somebody to talk to about this particular thing. And at the end of the day, we want to read the tea leaves to see, like, when is the company doing exceptionally well that we can double down? And if it's not doing well, what can we do to shine the light, shine the mirror on what's not going well for the entrepreneur to remediate it? Not tell them, be prescriptive. There's been this like push and pull of venture capital where, 20 years ago, it was like the Don Valentine, like heavy-handed, like, you work for me kind of thing. And then it became this real soft venture capital the last couple of years where it's been like, look, I don't want to annoy you. I don't want you to, God forbid you might not call me in the next round and then put some money into. There's something in between that is active venture capital where you can contribute to the company and you can affect outcomes. Because I really do believe that we can affect outcomes on the margin. We can help them with key things along the way. But honestly, it's just listening and being in the trenches, being responsive. The same goes for your teammates, right? It's just saying, I care about your development as a member of this team, and I want to spend the time and resources to help you achieve your potential.
And I mean, a lot of what you said, to me, sounds like the same advice I would want an entrepreneur to be doing too, right? When it comes to how they respond to their customers, to their team, all those other pieces. So we don't have too much time left. So I want to actually ask one last question, and then I'm going to make one quick comment because I think it's just sort of funny, and then a few other quick questions for you in the remaining time really fast. One is, you'll find this amusing. My first company almost got acquired by Okta really early on. When Okta, I think the share price, they were at $2 a share price, what they were giving out to their team at the time. So it wasn't like that early, but it was still pretty early. We said no. I regret that to this day, but c'est la vie, it's the way things are. We didn't really know who they were. We were like, do we really want to work there? Is that the sexy place to go work? Would that be our choice? Mistake. Nevertheless, that was sort of a funny story. Quick question. I know we talked about briefly, like you created some sort of like cool framework at MIT, right? For around like how to think through people. What was that really briefly, just because I found it so fascinating? if you have like 2 minutes, what was it? Or
Well, so it's looking for, so at the end of the day, people who apply to MIT are all outliers, right? They're people who are amazing, right? They all read well on paper. They all interview well. How do you find the best of the best, right? Because it's really already you have this crop of people who are applying who are amazing. And we had a framework. We worked on it with McKinsey to figure out who those best are. And what we do is we look for data. It's an evidence-based behavioral scoring system. And the idea is to look for somebody who's 1, 2, 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And the mean is pretty incredible, right? These are people who you show up and have had some success in the past, like in their work sphere, or something that they've done in the academic sphere, right? They've had some data to show you that they're on a steeper trajectory than somewhere else. And as you work your way up the system, 1, 2, 3 standard deviations away, it's a pattern that starts to emerge. It's a habitual thing, right? Somebody who's 1 standard deviation away might have done some things that are mild, have affected people or an org or something along those lines on a small scale, but maybe you've done it one time. And as they work their way 2 or 3 standard deviations away, this person who's like made huge impact. And so we look for things like, what they've done at work and academics, obviously their leadership, the ability for them to build relationships with others, right? It's about that relationship building, because no one's going to be successful as a CEO unless you can build relationships, both inside and outside the org. It's about that independent thinking, right? Somebody who's a black sheep, who's challenging the status quo, who's doing it in a way where they're not alienating people, right? That's really important. And, try to think of some of the other things that are on that scale. Yeah, those are the essential ones.
And so maybe sort of related to that, but one question I ask everybody at the end of our discussions: what is the one piece of advice? We boil it all down to one thing, which is not easy, of course. What is the one bit of advice you would try to give to every entrepreneur who's striving for excellence on a daily basis?
One piece of advice: fight to win, right? Because it's easy to quit.
Yeah.
Just like anything, like if you were going to be a great athlete, every day is a struggle, right? You walk in and some days are better than others. Every day as an entrepreneur, you could get the crap beat out of you. There's always something, some emergency, some situation that goes on. And it's really easy to get negative and down on yourself. But great entrepreneurs fight to win. And if not, they modulate, they adjust things in a way that they, can eventually fight to win.
And maybe on those lines, as they are fighting to win, I would highly recommend they get in touch with Steve at Riot and get some money from you to help them get through it. Where can folks who want to talk more, learn about what Riot does, how can they find you?
I mean, certainly go to riot.vc. You can see the kinds of companies that we've invested in. That gives you a good proxy of the kinds of things that we find attractive. Number 2, you can obviously send me an email, steve@riot.vc. Send me a note. I'm happy to chat with you and learn about your business and learn about you. Those are the easiest ways to reach me. I'm obviously on Twitter too, @smarcus. If you want to send me a DM, go for it.
Amazing. Steve, thank you so much for the time. Our time is so precious, so I appreciate you spending some time with me and our listeners.
Thanks, I'm glad to be the first guest of 2024.
Hell yeah, let's go crush this year. There's a lot of good things to happen for everybody. Challenges too, but a lot of good things to happen as well.
I appreciate it. Thanks,
Thank you.